Okay, great. So we'll start right off then with 7:4. Here we go. So we're in this conversation about Birkat Hamazon, and specifically we are, in addition specifically to talking about Birkat Hamazon, we're talking about the Zimun. We're talking about the space at the beginning where you can call people to prayer, essentially, where you say, the leader says, come, let us give thanks, let us do Birkat Hamazon, and then may God be praised, and may God now be praised forever and ever. And then we're talking about numbers here in 7:4. So shlosha she'achlu ke'echad einam rishan lechalek, sorry. V'chein arba'a v'chein chamisha. So 3 people who have gathered together, who have eaten together, may not separate to recite Birkat Hamazon. Essentially, we're going to talk about this a lot. The ideal of Birkat Hamazon is to say it as communally as possible. So if you have 3 people you have to have at least 3 in order to have the Zimun, in order to call somebody, to call a group of people to give thanks. And then essentially just giving you a little bit of a math problem, right? 3 people who have eaten together may not separate. Similarly, 4 or 5, right? Because if you have 3 and then you separated the 2, you would only have 2 on this side. 6 is able to separate because you can do 2 groups of 3. And then it says up until 10. So essentially you can do 3, 3, and 3. That would be 9. But once you get to 10, you should stay as 10. And then 10 should not separate until 20. And the reason for that is because the prayer actually gets altered just ever so slightly when you reach 10 people. And I just wanted to show you that to make sure that we're all on the same page. So you start here. Can you see that? The Birkat Hamazon? I'll see if I can make it a little bigger for you. Is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Much better.
Good. So we start with, this is called the Zimun. This is where we call people to do Birkat Hamazon together. In this version, it says Rabotai. You might hear Chaverai, like friends. Chaverai nevarech, let us say grace, or let us give thanks. Yehi Shem Adonai mevarach mi'atav ad olam. Blessed be the name of God from this time now and forever. And now you see Bershut Maranan v'Rabanan Rabotai. Again, that language sometimes shifts a little bit, Chaverai to friends versus sort of Rabbanan, like teachers. And then you see in the parentheses, it says Eloheinu. And down below, it doesn't actually say it, but what you would know is, I thought it said it somewhere. Anyway, that if you have 10 people, you add the name of God. And so that's essentially what they're talking about in this Mishnah. The reason that you can have the minimum of 3, and then you say the basic language. And then if you have up to 10, or if you have 10, sorry, you can add the name of God. And that's why if you have more than 10, you want to sort of keep that group of 10 and have that 10 grow until you get to 20. Now, again, just to reiterate what I said at the beginning, your goal is not to separate into many, many groups. Your goal is to stay together. But you can imagine certain circumstances where you might want to separate. Maybe somebody has to get somewhere. So that group of people wants to just do a quick Birkat Hamazon and be on their way. Maybe you're in a restaurant and you can't hear one another. So you just do it sort of in these small groups around, or in a cheder ocha, like a cafeteria, like in a camp or something like that. You can imagine these smaller groups just wanting to do it. But the ideal is always to say it as a group. So that's where I think you all left off. Are there any questions about that?
Yeah, I have. So let's say there are 15. So do they break off into 10 and 5?
No, that's exactly the last line. The 10 may not separate until there are 20. So you stay at 10.
Oh, I see.
And then you go to 20. And then, so you essentially, you want to have a minimum of 3. But if you get to 10, you want to have a minimum of 10. So then you wouldn't break that next group into 2.
I see.
Yeah, great. And at Beth Sholom, just because I always like to bring it into practice, we would sit at a table. We might have 5 or 6. But when we get to the part where we say Eloheinu, we kind of look around. Are there 10 people in the room that have eaten, right? We kind of extend that boundary a little bit in order to be able to say Eloheinu, because we can, and we know that there are other people in the room who essentially we're saying Birkat Hamazon on their behalf. Todd, did you want to say something? Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask to that point, what does it mean to have eaten together?
Right. That's a great question. I think, so we're going to see that a little bit in the next Mishnah, about being in the same room and table and things like that, being in the same house. we probably should just move there so that we can answer that question. But essentially, it's a little bit hard to know exactly what they mean. The Mishnah in the next one says if they were eating in the same room. The example I always think of when I read this is like, those of you who have Pesach tables that maybe like one table's in one room and one table's in the other room, kind of like makes it, you meet in the middle, but you kind of have this like divided, these big Passover meals that kind of spread out into different rooms. And the question is, can that table bench together? And the answer is yes. So why do you ask the question though?
Well, for exactly that reason that like I've always thought about it because people have been like, well, they said mochi together, they said kiddush together.
Yeah.
Right. So they kind of started together.
Right.
And but it could be, it could be in the same room, it's like actually, different tables started the meal differently.
The Gemara has a few answers to that. And like I said, we sort of see it in the next one. I'll just go there because we can. The Gemara, to explain Mishnah 5 here, gives an example of having the same waiter. So and to me, I would extend that to like Kiddush, for example, where it's like buffet style, right? So everybody's kind of eating at the same place, maybe being served.
Or at least it used to be buffet style.
Yes, I remember. That's okay. We'll talk about it like it's real, like it's current. So so I would extend that to the way that we do Kiddush. Certainly we consider that we've eaten together, but there is the line in Birkat Hamazon Shulchan Zeh, right? About this table, that I've eaten at this table. And that's why sometimes you see that people will actually move and sit at the table that they had their meal at, which does kind of give a complication during a place like Kiddush, because that people have eaten like all spread out, and then we ultimately just gather at one table to bench, and that's okay. So let's read number 5. Are there any other questions? Let's read number 5. And Ernie.
If there's only 2 of you, as is happening now when we're isolated.
Yeah.
For Shabbat, can you say Birkat Hamazon?
You absolutely say Birkat Hamazon. What you don't do is you don't do the zimun. You don't do that beginning part where you're essentially gathering people to do Birkat Hamazon together. You would do the actual brachot after by yourself, but you wouldn't do the zimun. Yeah, Catherine.
I was just also wondering if the 10 to 20 part is also about, you don't want to decrease holiness.
Yeah, that's a great what's the word, like term or whatever, principle, a Talmudic principle that you never want to decrease. It doesn't say that in the commentary, but I think that's a great reason. Certainly, this Mishnah 4 is about numbers, is about sort of keeping together these groups. But I love that. Yeah, you don't want to take away people from a group. The question is how we apply that to the phrase before, to the concept before, which essentially says you can go from 6 to 3. Right? Like you can take 6 and divide it into 2, and then you have 2 groups of 3. Does that make sense? As opposed to if you had more than 10, certainly you wouldn't want to do 10. Yeah, go ahead.
No, the holiness is saying God's name.
I see. Not like the number of people.
Numbers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, definitely. Right. Definitely the ideal is to have as many people as possible on one zimun so that you can say God's name. And if you had, 10 and 7, you wouldn't want to leave 7 on their own in order to not be able to say that for sure. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Got it. All right. Let's do number 5. Shtei chavarot shehayu ochlim bebayit echad. So this is interesting. This, you can see, the word bayit means house. So it says there are 2 companies or 2 chavarot, 2 groups of people that were eating in the same. Now this translation translates it as the same room, and many commentaries translate it as the same room. But we know that bayit means house. So already we have a confusion here because we don't know, are we talking about the same room or the same house? And that can actually, in our case, be different, right? Because of the case that we just talked about. Like if you have a Passover table that extends outside of one room, you have some people in the dining room and you have some people in the living room. Are they able to bench together? But we'll come back to it. Bizman shemiksatan ro'im elu et elu, hare elu mitztarfim lizimun. Ve'im lav, elu mizamnim le'atzman, ve'elu mizamnim le'atzmam. So there are two groups of people that are eating in the same space, we'll say for now, come back to it. When some of them can see some of the other, they combine for a zimun. But if they cannot see one another, if not, each group makes a zimun, but if not, each group makes a zimun for oneself. So that's kind of an interesting, so let's talk about koret, right? So we go into koret hall, we use buffet style for kiddush, for the oneg, for kiddush, and for the, eating your lunch. And then you all separate to separate tables, but you're all in the same room. So according to this Mishnah, we're good, right? We could all gather together to say the zimun and we're okay. But in the example that I gave before about Pesach, it can get a little bit complicated because sometimes there's a wall that's breaking it up. So actually the person that's sitting at the head of that table can't see the person that's sitting at the head of that table. And is that a problem? And the Gemara answers that problem. The Talmud answers that problem and says, as long as somebody from that group can see somebody from that group, we're okay. So it's not actually that every single person at the table has to see one another, but if, Todd is sitting on that end and Eren is sitting on that end and they can like sort of see each other and those two groups can combine. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you have a table that's a community table, you wouldn't want some people to bench on their own over there and some people to bench on their own over there, though the Mishnah does tell us that's okay. If you were sitting at a community table at Morning Minyan and you broke bread together and 4 or 5 people had to go to work, they could do their own zimun if they wanted to. But ultimately the goal again is to sort of have as many as possible. And so it says right off the bat that they can do that. Now this Mishnah essentially is 2 totally different topics in one. So I want to just pause and see if there are questions there. Any questions about like this sort of idea of seeing one another and being able to do Birkat Hamazon together, or the zimun, I guess, in this case? So coming back to what Ernie was saying, we're specifically talking about that opening part. We're not talking, everybody's always obligated to say Birkat Hamazon. We're talking about the beginning part of gathering people together to say the zimun. And here again, the Gemara, the commentaries help us to understand it, similar to what Todd was asking before. If an example would be if they share a waiter, right? So if the same waiter is coming around, you could, and so, those of you who have been in Israel, like maybe you can imagine a Friday night dinner in a hotel, for example, where there's many, many, many tables of different families. And at the end, sometimes Birkat Hamazon erupts among everybody because everybody is sort of being served their entree, their appetizer, then their entree, and then their dessert. Everybody's being sort of served at the same pace, at the same time, as opposed to, and kind of like if you would maybe at camp. But as opposed to, in a restaurant where it's clearly very separated tables and very separated meals. So I don't know if you've had that experience, but that's kind of what I was thinking of, like different, it's a community meal, but it's kind of not. So anyway, those are some examples that come to mind. Yeah. I
was also wondering if, like I've been in places where someone's like, well, no, I didn't have bread, so I'm going to have mezunot, so I'm not going to say birkat, right? And I'm just wondering, is there some requirement or aspect of that? Just like, in a minyan, you need to have a minimum, 6 people to participate in the service to be able to do certain parts,
yeah,
right? Not just present. So I'm just wondering if birkat has the same kind of thing.
Yeah, this was a hot topic a couple of weeks ago because we were talking about the lechem and we were talking about, that's okay. We were talking about what it means to have a meal versus, just the mizonot or a snack. And there were some feelings around this idea that you actually can't say Birkat Hamazon if you have not eaten a meal, right? And how you sort of keep track of that at a place like Kiddush, right? After services where people sort of gather just to sing, right? They gather because they like to say Birkat Hamazon as a community, and maybe you actually haven't had a piece of challah or you haven't had what you might consider a full meal. And so the Mishnah tells us that you're not supposed to say Birkat Hamazon if you haven't in fact had a meal. And there's talk in the Mishnah about what a meal, how you weigh out a meal. Like, is it kazait? Is it as much of an olive? Is it bigger? Is it bread? Is it contain grain and things like that? But the consensus in this group, I think, is that is that saying an extra blessing can't hurt? I think if I'm going to represent the group well. Okay. Any other questions about this first part? Okay, so we're going to move to the second part of the Mishnah, which is about the wine. So, ein mevarchim al hayayin al ad sheyiten utocho mayim. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, v'hachamim omrim mevarchim. So they do not bless over the wine until they have put water into it. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. And the sages, the hachamim, say, no, you bless it no matter what. Now, this is kind of interesting. You see here, I have a link for the Pesach Seder, which we'll look at in 1 second. In order to drink wine back then, if there are any wine connoisseurs in the room and they want to comment, please feel free. The wine was this like thick, not drinkable substance in its purest form, right? So the idea was that in order to drink it, you had to add water. And the question is, so the comments that I have here is essentially that if you water had to be mixed, and once you mixed it, it lowered the alcohol content to about 5%, as opposed to like 13 or 14%. If you were to sort of drink this mucky, thick, whatever this was, wine without the water. And so the idea was that in order to be able to say the blessing, you had to put the water into it. And a reference, just to give a little bit of context, is if you look in the Pesach Seder, I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, it says, oh, I'm way off here. Sorry, hold on a second. I want to go back to the very beginning. It says here, Mozgim Kos Rishon. See that? Mozgim Kos Rishon. Mazgu actually means to mix, but in your Haggadah, 9 times out of 10, it's going to say pour, right? But what actually the reference is here is that there's this substance, which they're calling wine. And in order for you to drink it, you actually do have to put water into it. And so a lot of times the translations are off between mazgu or mixing and actually what it means to pour, right? So they understood that as, well, we have to get to a place where we're saying we're pouring this wine that we can use. And in order for that to be drinkable, we have to actually mix it with water. So I just wanted to give you that little bit of a reference. Oops, sorry. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer says, you don't actually bless on this murky wine. You don't bless on this thing that you essentially can't drink. And the Hachamim say that you can. There's really not much more to it than that. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. My biggest question, in which I didn't really get to the bottom of it, to be honest, is like why this Mishnah is together the way that it is, right? I mean, one point is that we do know that at Birkat HaMazon, we do bless over, we can have a cup of wine there. And so we do that sometimes at the end of Birkat HaMazon or at the beginning, either saying Borei Pri Hagafen at the beginning or the end. And so that's an older custom and that might be some reference here about including the wine in Birkat HaMazon and in this Mishnah, but it is kind of strange. It almost looks like they were written as two and then put together. But it is just sort of another note about wine. Yeah, Sandy.
Well, I had a question because I heard that in those days, people drank wine because they couldn't drink the water.
That's right.
It wasn't safe. Oh. So part of this would be that you're blessing the water too. I mean, the water has a role. It's not just about the wine. I mean, I know the wine is the sacramental piece of it, but
sure.
I don't know if you've run across anything about that. Definitely wine was more popular than water, and people drank. That's why this was from way back. We talked about when we were talking about the blessings over wine and over water, right? And that we say a specific blessing for wine. And part of the reason, again, in addition to like honoring Shabbat and having kiddush on joyful occasions and things like that, was because wine was the drink that they drank most often, more than water. And certainly, yeah, I would say that it had to do with cleanliness issues. Now, where I thought you were going to go with that question and I wasn't going to have the answer for you was if the water was unsafe to drink,
why would you mix it into your wine? Okay, that's where I thought you were going with that question. But I guess the
No,
wine
but they mixed it in because the wine took care of
would kill yeah.
whatever bad properties there.
Right. Yeah, I don't know that they
Whiskey will do that, but wine doesn't have high enough alcohol content.
Yeah, I'm not sure that well, I'm not going to take a stance on this one, but I would say that that it's I don't know the ratio either, right? So I don't know if it was this much kind of gross wine and this much water or whatever. It doesn't say that even in the Pesach Seder. Tomer,
It may have also been that the water was not lethal. It just didn't taste good. It may have tasted brackish or something. And
Maybe.
that's why
we
people
talked
drank
about the
wine.
whole
It
thing with
tasted better.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we talked about the whole thing with the mikvah, right? About going down into these gross water. I mean, I don't think there was obviously no filtration system. There was no filtration system, and they were also not super concerned about hydration, right? Because Ernie asked that at one point. We were talking about like, why would you not bless water? You need water to live, and I'm not sure that they necessarily sort of equated those two things. You know, that you needed water in the way that we know that we need water today. Tomer,
They may have boiled the water as well.
I didn't hear you, Stephen. What did you say?
Solve some, if not all, of the problems about drinking water.
I didn't hear. Say it again.
They may have boiled the water before mixing it, and that would have solved at least some, if not all, of the problems of drinking water. But as we know, water in Israel is a limited commodity. So
The problem is germ theory was not understood until much, much later.
Right. I mean, only that you would know that if you consumed something that made you sick enough times, you might put two and two together, but you might not understand why. One might not in the times of the Mishnah. Tomer, did you want to say something?
Oh, I mean, to me, I see the parallel structure in that for the sages that maybe disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, that they see, again, holiness and holiness coming together. Just like in the previous paragraph about two groups who say blessings, if they combine, that's also good. And that seems the parallel structure of the wine. You can bless the wine, you can bless the water to combine. I believe I'm also echoing someone's earlier comments.
Beautiful, thank you. So this idea of mazgu in both circumstances, that you're mixing groups of people and you're mixing water and wine. I love that. Thank you. So yeah, we can go down I think we can go down a rabbit hole in terms of the wine, but just to understand that there's this discrepancy about what it means to be poured, essentially, like what it means when it's able to be consumed, I guess, is really what we're talking about, and that's what the sages and Rabbi Eliezer were concerned about. Should we bless over something that when we drink it is either not I don't know, not enjoyable or really shouldn't be drank in that way. Okay, so this is the end of chapter 7. Any other questions? We're going to move to 8. Exciting, we're almost done. Come a long way. Okay. All right, so I'll close out these blanks. All right, so we are coming back here to our friends Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah, you like that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, make sure you read the beginning. It says Beit Din, rock, paper, scissors. Okay. So as we can see here, and as we know from previous studies of Mishnah and the text that we studied before, Hillel and Shammai had over 300, I think it says in the Mishnah, machlokot, 300 disagreements. And they say that the disagreements were l'shem shamayim, were for the sake of heaven, right? That there were always sort of a greater purpose in their argument, that it wasn't just to argue. It wasn't to argue just to argue. They had many, many sages under them, right? So people that came after them that were in their school and represented them. You'll see them referred to as Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, so the house of, or the school of Hillel and Shammai. And you can also see here that we more often side with Hillel than we do with Shammai. And just as a reminder to why that is, Shammai often takes the more strict opinion. So Shammai was always concerned with Jews getting sort of wrapped up in what was going on outside of Jewish life where they lived. So Shammai was always concerned with, the Jewish tradition being weakened by sort of outside groups of people and what they might be doing. And so he always took a more strict opinion so that sort of to make sure that didn't happen, that Jews sort of stayed strict to the tradition and that they didn't stray and follow other traditions. And Hillel, not to say that he wasn't concerned with Jewish tradition, of course he was concerned with Jewish tradition, but he was more concerned about people's welfare. And so he took often a less strict position, and that's the one that we more often follow today. The most famous of the Beit Hillel Shammai arguments is, of course, the Chanukiah, which we studied over Hanukkah, about whether you're increasing in light or decreasing in light. We know that people observe in both ways, but that the majority of people observe adding a light each night as opposed to taking away. Hillel added, Shammai took it away. But so this whole chapter of the Mishnah, chapter 8 of the Mishnah, is essentially arguments, or machlokot, I should say. Machlochet means it's like not really to argue, but it's to have a conversation over, I suppose. In the Talmud, we see it a lot in the Mishnah. So this next chapter of Mishnah, chapter 8, is all these conversations between Beit Hillel and Shammai and in places where they disagree. So here we go. So Brachot 8:1. Elu devarim shebein Beit Shammai uBeit Hillel b'seuda. These are the points or the things where Hillel and Shammai disagreed in regard to a seuda, in regard to a meal. So you can see we're in the same topic, right? Birkat Hamazon and other meal-related brachot. Beit Shammai omrim mivarech al hayom ve'achar kach mivarech al hayayin. So Beit Shammai says first one should bless over the day, and then one should bless over the wine. And Beit Hillel says no. Mivarech al hayayin ve'achar kach mivarech al hayom. So before we know that we go with Hillel, we're going to look at what it actually means to, this is the Friday night Kiddush, but sort of just like upon hearing this verse, right, Hillel Shammai, what are your thoughts on what we actually, we know what we do, right? But what are your thoughts about that? So we have Shammai who says, first we bless over Shabbat and then we bless over the wine. So first we acknowledge that today is Shabbat and then we bless over the wine. And Hillel says, no, first we should bless the wine and then we should bless Shabbat. And I'm curious, before we sort of get into how the text actually lays out, like, what are your thoughts? Who are you? Are you a Shammai or are you a Hillel?
Shammai.
Shammai, yeah, why, Sandra?
Well, because you're there, that seems to be salient. You're starting Shabbat.
Great. So you want to acknowledge the day before you drink your wine. Great. Dara, did you have your hand up? No, I think it came down.
No, can I say? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, go ahead, Dara.
I agree with Sandra. I mean, Team Shammai seems to make a lot of sense here. That Shabbat is the most important thing. So, on its face, it sounds like it makes sense to do it in Shammai's way.
Great. Okay, thanks. Marcia.
Yeah, I usually go with Hillel, and I usually think that Shammai is like the Haredi rabbi, and such a stickler. But this actually, I have to agree just on the face of it. Now, I may disagree after I hear their arguments, that it's the Shabbat. It's the whole idea of the day. It's not even the idea of what you're eating or how you're blessing the day that is paramount. And so that you would bless Shabbat first.
Great. All right. Thanks. Betsy.
Well, I mean, it is what we do. He won. Because we start by Hulul Hashemayim Ba'aretz Ve'Kol Hatzvam. It's like we go right into what the seventh day was from Breshit, and like after this long first paragraph, then we say Borei Pri Hagafen. And so it is, I mean, he won this one.
So you think Shammai won? We're gonna see if that's true in just a minute. But I like your reasoning, Todd.
No, actually, this is very similar to the Hanukkah candles. We increase in holiness, right? So we go from the stuff we do every day to the stuff we do Rosh Chodesh, and then the stuff we might do once a year.
Right, that's right. So here I'm just going to highlight this Talmudic principle for you: tadir v'she'eno tadir kodem. That which is regular versus that which is not regular. The regular comes first. So if you have Shabbat Rosh Chodesh, you start by blessing Shabbat, and then you add Rosh Chodesh. We'll come back to more examples like that, and we're going to look at the text. But that's exactly right. So you sort of start with what comes most regularly, and then you add on Tomer.
So the first question I have in looking at this is, this question seems moot nowadays, because what comes first for us is to light the candles. And there you say Hadlik Ner Shel Shabbat or Yom Tov. So was that a later rabbinical institution? Was that instituted later than the Mishnah?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right in that it's moot, except that they're just talking about Kiddush specifically. So when they're essentially saying, when you do Kiddush, do you do the wine first or do you do the Shabbat? Because it's kind of all in one. Kiddush did come before lighting candles. It's a later development. I don't exactly know how much later. And we'll see in Havdalah, even that in like 4 or 5 Mishnayot later, we're going to talk about the difference between, or the order of Havdalah and where the Ner comes in and why you actually light candles in that particular moment. So yeah, good question. Todd, did you want to say something?
Well, say even when Shabbat and say Rosh Hashanah fall together, we say the blessing is Shabbat v'Yom HaZikaron. So
right.
It's the order is the every day, and then the once a year or the special event.
Great. Catherine and Iren, I saw you had your hands, but no longer. Are you moving on? Moving on. Okay, Iren.
I only was going to ask a question regarding, are you supposed to pour the wine at the same time before you light the candles? Or that's a question. I mean, ours, we pour it after the candles, but it may be important to know if the wine is already poured by the time you light the candles.
No.
Sorry, what's it?
What I'm trying to figure out, do you pour the wine even in order 1 before you light the candles, but you say the prayer in order 2?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you don't have to do them. You don't have to do Ner, Kiddush, and Hamotzi. Essentially, you don't have to do the candles, the wine, and the Hamotzi back to back, like all at one time. Because if, for example, Shabbat were to start at 4:30, like we know it does right now, you would light your candles at 4:30, but you might not sit to dinner until 5:30 or 6.
Oh,
right?
I see.
So in terms of that, right? So it becomes more important at Havdalah when each of those brachot sort of follow one another, and there's an actual doing them out of order. Whereas here, you would still start with the Ner, but the candles, but they could be an hour apart. Tomer.
So then there's no explanation why Hillel would win in this case.
Well, we're going to see why in a second, but yes. Yeah, Tomer.
Following up on Irene's point, if you have to, bearing in mind the previous section that we read, if you have to mix the wine, is there any concern about mixing it before Shabbat?
That's a great question. So I would think that you would want, nowadays you don't have to worry about it, but I would, and then again, we're going to see in like a Mishnah or 2 about sort of impurities, about if you're pouring and mixing and your touches your hands and all these kinds of things. But yeah, I would assume that you should not mix the wine on Shabbat. The question is if they were mixing in every glass. It's a great question. I don't actually know the answer in terms of this particular custom, because I haven't thought about it because we don't do it. But it's a great question as to whether they mix their wine ahead of time, like if they were pouring mixed wine, or if they were pouring this kind of like solution and then adding the water onto it. There's not discussion that I know of about it, but I'm happy to check.
Yeah, and I think that would have bearing in this discussion between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, if that was of concern if you have to bless it right after, there's kind of a principle of you should bless something as soon as you have done it or even before you do it.
Right.
And so then you may want to shorten that duration of time that lapses.
And when we're talking about like the Shabbat candles, were lit for benefit, right? As opposed to the Hanukkah, which you're not supposed to benefit from, but the Shabbat lights are essentially supposed to be the light of your home, right? And so they probably didn't have the same sort of cultural norms that we do, which is that dinner is at 6 p.m., right? Dinner or Shabbat dinner probably was like candles followed by, and so to Iren's point, there probably wasn't a big lapse between the candles and the wine like we might have today. Iren.
My question is, did everyone have access to wine? Or in certain cases, did people bless water?
Well, I think what we learned before is that wine was even more common as a drink than water was. The question is like maybe about poor people and slaves and whether or not they had access to wine. And the assumption is yes, but because of how like sort of normal it was not considered like a delicacy in the same way.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you. All right, let's look at Kiddush. So we have in Kiddush, Betsy pointed out to us, we have a few sections here. See if I can get it all on one page. We have the Hakdama, we have the introduction paragraph, which is Yom HaShishi, right? Talking about where Betsy was sort of saying, well, we do bless the day, we do talk about the day. But if you'll notice here, there is no bracha. So we're very specific in terms of what we mean by blessing the day, right? So it says, and this is a section from the Torah, right? The section from Bereshit, the very last section, Yom HaShishi, and then there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Heaven and earth were finished and all their array. The seventh day, God finished the work. So this is kind of an intro, right? We're getting here, just as a reminder to everybody, this is why we are doing Kiddush in the first place, right? Because on the seventh day, God rested and it's a special bracha, it's a special day in which we are going to sanctify by drinking wine. And then in accordance with Rav Hillel, with Beit Hillel, we say Yain first, Baruch Atah Hashem Elohim melech haolam, Borei Peri Dafen, we bless the wine, and then we bless the day. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who find favor in mitzvot, and find favor with us, sanctifying us with mitzvot. Love and favor, you made us the holy Shabbat, etc., etc. In love and favor, you have given us the holy Shabbat as an inheritance. Blessed are you, Adonai, who sanctifies Shabbat. So actually, we are blessing on the wine, like Hillel says, and then we're blessing on the day. I showed you this already, this principle of tadir v'she'enu tadir kodem, that which is regular, you always do the more regular of the two things first. And just to sort of share, because I know there was different opinions here, you said on its face, a lot of you said, well, just by looking at the argument, I would side with Shammai, but I'd like to hear what they actually have to say. And what they have to say is the following. Shammai would say that you wouldn't be drinking wine if it wasn't Shabbat, right? So Shammai would say, and I don't know that the argument holds, I'm just telling you what the commentaries say. Shammai would say the reason that you bless over the day and then you bless over the wine is that you wouldn't be blessing over the wine if it wasn't Shabbat. So you should probably bless over, and that's kind of what I was hearing, I think, from a lot of people here, right? That the Shabbat is the essence of what we are saying a bracha over. And Beit Hillel says the opposite. If there was no wine, you wouldn't be able to make the Kiddush. And so of course you should be making, you should acknowledge the fact that we even have the wine and then make the Kiddush. And because you're able to make the Kiddush, then you can say the day. So thoughts, sort of now going back on you all had your first go around of siding with Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. Does any of this change for you? Not that important, not that interesting. That's okay. It's just the way that we do it, right? We're so used to it at this point that we sort of, yeah, Betsy. I think you're muted, Betsy.
Sorry, the concept is, when I was saying we were already the day going into Shabbat, but yeah, it was not in the form of a blessing.
That's right.
So what you're saying is there has to be that blessing. So it's an interesting combination of their views.
Right. That's exactly right.
I
So
mean, to me, it's sort of like almost a compromise.
yeah, it is almost like a compromise. And when was that paragraph? I mean, when was that actually structured that way? It's hard to know, right? Kind of like our liturgy, like we don't like the paragraph of the intro may not have been there originally and was potentially added later. And so we're just looking at those two. But now we have this extra paragraph that yeah, you kind of nailed it. You like it's a compromise between the two. Maybe that's what they had. Sandy.
I was taught by an Orthodox rabbi that it's not just a matter of the order, that we bless the wine, we sanctify the wine, and the wine is used to sanctify the Shabbat. And I was wondering if that's anything you've ever heard, and I've never understood it at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I haven't heard it said that way before, but so you're saying that the wine would come first because we need the wine in order to sanctify Shabbat. I mean, it sort of makes sense, right? Like in the same way that we sort of bookend lighting candles before, and like we do a candle before Shabbat and a candle at the end. We kind of have a kiddush at the beginning and a kiddush at the end. I don't know. Todd?
I'm actually wondering now, why do we say the blessing for Shabbat after the wine but before motzi? It seems like we should say it after motzi.
Yeah, so I would say the answer to that well, there's a couple things. First of all, there's going to be impurity issues. There's going to be the washing your hands. There's going to be going from kiddush to washing your hands to doing the bread. So we're going to see that in a minute. So that's part of it. And also I would think it's because the bread ultimately leads into your meal. You're essentially like, you're saying it over the challah, but you're sort of saying, if you think about the order in which you did it, you'd have to it'd be going a little bit backwards to, I don't know, that, right? To say kiddush and then wash your hands and then essentially have your meal is how you would do it, as opposed to saying the motzi. I guess you would wash your hands, say the motzi, say the kiddush, and then eat your meal. I don't know, doesn't seem to flow in the same way, right?
I'm just trying to think now about the Passover Seder again, right? Because we do wash our hands, right? And then we have the matzah, and then we have the halal sandwich. So you know, we go into eating, but we don't go into the meal.
A full meal till later.
Yeah.
Well, and also washing hands is, I mean, we know, Mrs. Yadayim, we know washing hands is most often associated with bread, but not always, right? Like we wash our hands in the morning also when we don't actually eat a meal. So yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure. We'll have to explore it more. Tomer, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just going to add regarding the wine being sanctified, then to sanctify the day, Shabbat. It reminds me of what we have with the holiness of Shabbat being used to sanctify Rosh Chodesh, the month. And that kind of powers in the teaching, that kind of powers the Jewish cycle, the Jewish calendar.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Marcia.
You know, I'd like to go into a little discussion about the order, not the order of whether it's the wine or the day, but actually this whole idea of you bless the regular first and not the special. Because part of me thinks that you would start by blessing the special and then bless the regular. Why is this moment in time different than the last moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to hear what other people think of that. Other than outside of this principle, I don't know that I have, like that, being that that's sort of a principle that we follow across many topics, right? Like we were talking about it in Kiddush, and we were mentioning it in like in the Amidah or on Shabbat, where if we have certain other additions that we would, so like take it even one step further, right? You have Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and Hanukkah, which we had a couple weeks ago. And you would start with Shabbat, which would be the most regular, and then you would go to Rosh Chodesh, and then you would go to Hanukkah. But I'm happy to hear arguments of why, you feel maybe differently. Betsy, have your hand up. We'll come back to Betsy. Iren.
I think the beauty of Shammai and Hillel is that they represent a compromise, because if you start with one and end with the third, or if you start with the third and end with the one, the beauty of it is that it's the combination of the three that makes the ritual. And maybe they came up to an argument that ends up with a compromise.
Yeah, you're reading it very in a very forgiving way, I would say, right? So definitely you could say Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel have an agreement, and the agreement is that you should say a bracha over the wine and you should say a bracha over Shabbat, right?
Yes.
And again, we've talked about the way that they argue or the way that they discuss this, which is l'shem shamayim. It's for the sake of heaven. It's like, it's not for winning or losing. It's for the sake of, creating a ritual that's going to be meaningful and that's going to sort of have life.
Yeah.
To say that it's a compromise, I'm not so sure. I think that might be a little bit too kind. But in this instance, we do see that what we came out with was a compromise, whether because of that Vayachulu paragraph at the beginning, whether that was Hillel and Shammai's intent is unclear, I would say. Catherine.
So I guess this is more of a comment or a pondering, but I mean, Jews today are Shabbat Jews. We don't do most of the commandments, the regular commandments. We just bench on, we just bench and bless things on Shabbat. And I just think it must be hard for us to really understand what it means to actually do the regular stuff, and why it might be more important.
Because our week so much centers, our Judaism so much centers around Shabbat that, right? So what you're saying is that they may be saying Birkat, they probably are saying Birkat Hamazon 3 times a day, every single day, and so of course, and potentially saying Kiddush multiple times a week, right? Like blessing over wine multiple times a week. Whereas we might find ourselves only doing that on Shabbat, and so it feels less. The whole thing feels irregular, right? It doesn't feel like you're adding or anything, right? That's great point. Betsy, you are muted though.
I didn't realize that I had my hand up. I didn't have any.
Okay.
Thank you.
Marcy, you also, or your hands lingering from the last time? Stephen.
I was thinking as we were talking about this, about how right at the beginning of morning Mishnah, we have a blessing that's related to rubbing the sleep from our eyes. And it is only by starting with the regular and what is the most basic to us that we can reach the special and understand what the special is. If we start with the special and go to the regular, it's an anticlimax.
So in this case, like the example that you gave, what would be the special and what would be the regular would be sort of the morning brachot, getting sleep out of your eyes, washing your hand, whatever. And then what would be the special in this case?
Well, in morning minyan, it would be the blessings about the goodness of God and bringing insight and thinking about others and what we can do for them and wishing them health and studying the Torah.
Yeah. You're thinking more thematically about the order of prayers, which is that the first thing we do when we open our eyes is to thank God that our eyes opened, right?
Well,
and then from there we can sort of have we've gotten our bodies warmed up in order to acknowledge maybe the next layer of things in our life, which is, like you said, sanctity of friends and relationships and things like that.
Right. In terms of the Birkat Hamazon, it's by starting with or the blessings at the beginning of Shabbat and all that. It's focusing on these are our basic needs. The wine and the water are basic needs, And once we acknowledge that fundamental thing, we can think about the bigger issues of God and Shabbat.
Great. Thank you, Todd.
To follow up on Stephen's point and following on Aren's point earlier, I mean, would Beit Shammai say you do Musaf before Shachari?
Right. Would he? Probably not. because
Right?
Musaf, yeah.
Because Musaf is the special service, right. For the special sacrifice for the particular day as opposed to the everyday. Right. And
yeah.
you know, that would feel consistent with the way he's got these items in the Mishnah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you know, the Musaf is like, the Musaf feels so in its name as the addition, right? That you sort of save it to the end. But yeah, it's a great question. What would Shammai say about Musaf? I don't know. Ellen.
Well, I am puzzling about all of this. I can't say I'm committed to any viewpoint, but I always think when we mention Shabbat before we bless the wine, it makes it really special. It's not just that we're drinking wine, it's that we're sanctifying the wine in part because we're sanctifying the day of Shabbat.
Yeah, I think the introduction is a really important, even though they're not talking about the introduction necessarily in this Mishnah specifically, I think it's a really important, almost like a kavanah in order to get to the bracha, right? It's kind of like you're sort of setting the scene. Remember that the reason that we're about to do all the brachot that we are about to do is because on the sixth day, you know, God rested on the seventh day. And that's kind of what that paragraph is all about. So it makes a lot of sense why the order is, in this case, the way that it is. But again, it's not really what Shammai and Hillel were arguing about, but I do agree with you that I like the compromise where we landed. Iren.
You know, I was thinking that, I don't know if it helps Shammai or Hillel, but the first thing is what you see, is what the eyes see, and the light is what comes on. The second thing is what you smell, which is the wine, although the bread you smell it too. And the third thing is the taste. So if you combine the senses, there may be an order associated to it as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Which would go more.
Yeah, what to say about our senses and the way that we experience the different elements of the things that we're saying brachot over. For sure, there's a drash there somewhere. There's an explanation or a drash in what you're saying. Any other thoughts? We only have about 2 minutes left, so I'm not gonna go on to Mishnah 2. It's too long and complicated. It's about sort of washing hands and impurities and things like that. So if there are any last thoughts about wine and Shabbat and holiness and anything like that, I'm happy to hear. Betsy?
Not so much anything like that, but I just thought it'd be nice. And you might have started with this, but I wasn't on at the beginning, to make sure to wish everyone who we haven't gotten to wish a Happy New Year.
Sure, yeah. Happy New Year, everybody.
It's nice to see everyone this morning.
Yes, agreed.
Even though I was hiding for most of this.
Everybody start off their
I think it's going to be amazing at